question is, what about when the alienating parent claims alienation by the other parent? Have you had this situation? What do you do about it?
I fight it. I had a case just this year where I represented a mother, accused of parental alienation, where it was in reality the father who was engaging in alienating behaviors, filing motions after motions in the court with false statements, sending horrible text messages and signals to the child for rejecting the mother. And at the end of the day, after a trial, the judge saw it, agreed with it, provided the necessary intervention, including change of custody, parenting time, but more importantly, financial sanctions, attorney fees award, and costs.
Dr. Baker, why does CPS not understand the need to not accept the children's bold, outrageous, and pressured statements against the parent, especially since they see the signs of and symptoms of real abuse, which, as you show clearly, are not the same?
Well, there's a lot of answers to that. One is they're not trained in parental alienation. Another is most state statutes don't include emotional abuse, even as part of the definition of child abuse. And when they do, they're not, the people who are trained to know what emotional abuse is don't necessarily see that parental alienation is a form of emotional abuse. So it's a training issue.
Okay. Ms. Gottlieb, if an adult recognizes their alienation in childhood and desires to change their negative perceptions and mend the relationship with the rejected parent, can this be achieved? What suggestions for the therapist do you have?
Wow. That's great when it happens. And I get calls all the time because I remain public, and I do get calls about spontaneous reunifications, and it really makes my heart throb. I always suggest that, however, that they seek professional help with a therapist for doing that. Nobody knows what has happened to the, well, there are a lot of issues. So it's great when it happens. I wish it happened more often. For the alienated parents in the audience, in case you get these calls and you can't find one of us, be very, very careful just to listen to your child. Make sure you correct any misconceptions. Do not pathologize the other parent. I sadly had a couple of cases who I actually wrote about in my book. They came, the child initiated the contact, and the rejected parent, the alienated parent, was only invested in pathologizing and blaming the other parent, and the child was sitting there saying, I don't want to do that. That's between mommy and me. I just want to heal us. And it's very hard. It's very, very hard. I mean, not to want to get even. I think it may be part of human nature that we want to get even. So seek professional help. There are a lot of emotions. Who knows what you're going through? I mean, it was a trauma to be separated, and in some ways there are similar traumatic feelings to suddenly find your child on your doorstep.
Time's up. Okay, Dr. Miller. We talk about the emotional effect. You guys asked a lot of wonderful questions, and I'm just enough of a jerk to go, this is time's up to get on, because these are great questions. Dr. Miller, excuse me, Linda. Dr. Miller, we talk about the emotional effects of parental alienation. Please address the physical, the heart, the stomach. The alienated children get physically sick. We need to address that too. Wouldn't you agree? Can you tell us about that?
I agree, and I have a few thoughts, but I couldn't possibly do it justice.
Well, Spinazzola.
Well, and Felitti. So he's mentioned a study Spinazzola is a study from 2014 et al. This guy Al is prolific, by the way, called Unseen Wounds. But I like to go back in a minute or so. You've got something called the ACE study, or more accurately, the first of the ACE studies from 1998, Felitti et al., and that found that adverse childhood experiences, which is what ACE stands for, were major risk factors for all sorts of physical illness in adult life, including premature death from physical illness such as heart disease, lung disease, and cancer, not psych. Then there are studies showing that it physically damages the brain. Anda was the second author of the first ACE study, and he wrote a paper in 2006, I don't want to say establishing, but strongly suggesting that it caused structural physical rewiring damage to the brain. There are several other studies that show it induces psychological disorders, including the Spinazzola study, and that most notably showed, only 2 more points, most notably Spinazzola showed that not only is physical abuse as damaging to children, sorry, said it backwards, psychological and emotional abuse is as damaging to children as physical abuse, but as a risk factor, and we're talking risk factors here, it says risky and damaging as sexual abuse. And 2 more studies, I won't go through the authors for save time, but there's a 2011 study that shows loss of brain mass. The title contains the words corticostrial loss, and a 2016 study showing that the damage is at a molecular level. And that shows that children who don't have fathers have shortening of their telomeres, and the telomere, or telomere if you watch television, is the end cap of a DNA molecule, and it's normally long, and it shortens with either age or injury, and it's shorter in children who don't have fathers. Although that's scary data, and I think I answered the question.
You did. Okay. I want you to know that my telomeres are really stretched because I'm trying to get through Judge Marcus's handwriting and Nick Child's handwriting. And believe me, I need hazard pay for this. But Dr. Burnett, is there room for a section in PASG devoted to prevention? How do we energize adults who, as children, were alienated to come forward and be part of that campaign?
Well, first of all, I really appreciate the idea of having components within this organization, within PASG, devoted to various tasks. And we already have several committees, and I'm proposing at our board meeting that we add committees. And for instance, one could be on prevention. I think I saw an email from Dr. Child, and I picked up on that, and I think that would be a good committee. In other words, you can't just get an entire organization to do something. You have to define a group of 4 or 5 or 6 people, and they have a task, and we can have a committee on prevention, and they can figure out what to do, and whether, and they would bring ideas to the board, and then perhaps they could recruit other people to help. In other words, we can create a whole project, and we have other committees that do things like this. Well, I'll just mention. We have a committee that runs the website where we have the database. Bob Farrer is the head of that. Other people help him. We have this huge database of more than 1,000 articles. And in other words, the organization runs on committees, and I think the suggestion is a really good one, to have a prevention committee.
Yeah, and let's get the psychiatrist Child and the Judge Marcus to get together and politic exactly that. I think that's a great start. Mr. Joshi, while trying to regain parenting time and have and get a court-ordered custody expert evaluation ordered by the court, what should be the balance in presenting the information to the court? How much should we focus on the children's symptoms and display versus the mother's behaviors driving those symptoms?
Both.
Being asked for a percentage.
Well, there's no, well, as I told you, I'm math phobic, so I don't have a percentage, but it depends on the case. It depends on the evidence you have. Not all 17 factors or strategies have to be present, and not all 8 symptoms have to be present. It could be a balance of both, and it's case specific. But you have to do justice to both of them. Alienating strategies which are present and the symptoms in the child.
Dr. Baker, has any research been done on the prevalence of PA in the African American community, and if it presents differently? If so, what has that research shown?
There is going to be a presentation tomorrow in the research track on prevalence of parental alienation. I think that would be a question for the people who are doing that research. That's not, I would say that we're really in the first generation of research on parental alienation, and we haven't really drilled down to different subcultures and different backgrounds of family. So I am not aware of any ethnicity or race or whatever specific research.
Okay, well, I'm not going to let you get off the hook. That's another one.
Okay.
All right, so with the PSQ, can we get the PSQ in schools? I work in special education, emotional behavior children in middle school, and I've given a presentation about PA to school districts. The administrators, school psychologists would greatly benefit from something like this. How do we get it?
So the BSQ is the Baker Strategy Questionnaire. I'm a little embarrassed I named it after myself. Anyway, I'm sorry. So we should just call it the SQ. Anybody can use it. It's free. It's available. Anybody who wants to use it can just email me. I think the question though is, what would it be used for? I'm not sure that I would be completely comfortable with a school guidance counselor giving it to a child and then making some sort of decision, even, calling a parent in and saying your child says you're doing whatever. I think there'd have to be some thought into how it would be used to help the family rather than to label people or necessarily even start a child protection case on somebody because the kid says the parent's doing it. So I would want to know more about how it's being used, but anybody can use it.
Okay, so Ms. Gottlieb, you were talking about the kinds of therapy and the origins of the kind of therapy you were doing. Can you describe the latest understanding of attachment theory, Lamb, Joe Kelly, etc., and how PA impacts it? Isn't the child's, what's this word? Submission informed in part by attachment theory. Let me try that again. Can you describe the latest understanding? No, you just got to take my word for it. Can you describe the latest understanding of attachment theory and how PA impacts it? Isn't the child's submission informed in part by attachment theory?
The child's what?
Submission in part informed by attachment theory. Yeah, what he said.
Humana. For those of you who know, Jackie Gleason.
Does attachment theory impact the work that you do?
Attachment theory. Children need attachment to both parents. That's what I could say about that.
Okay.
Am I off the hook?
So you state that family therapy doesn't focus on individual factors. It focuses on relationships and the interaction thereof. Isn't it contrary to state that the personality disorder, which are individually based, are significant factors in these alienation cases? How would family therapy remediate a sociopath, for example?
Family therapy hasn't done a very good job addressing personality disorders. I don't remember it being discussed once at the Mnuchin Center. But when I have looked at the history of alienating parents, I have found that they would get caught up in a lot of parental dysfunction and triangled in to that situation. You can have any problem that is caused by dysfunctional family relationships. And I would say that personality disorders are generational and are modeled for the children. Dr. Miller knows more about the research about personality disorders. I am the first to say I'm not an expert on personality disorders. I choose not to treat them. I don't treat alienating parents. I refer them to experts who really do. There may be, I think Dr. Millen talks about, there is some research about the brain being different among when you have a personality disorder than when you don't. The question that I think if Sal Minuchin were here, he would ask is, well, which is the cause and which is the effect when you study it? So, can I pass that on?
Nope.
Get rid of this
No.
horrible question?
No, but you're off the hook. Dr. Miller, what is the equivocation fallacy?
Well, first, I apologize for not explaining that, but it's a logical fallacy that is often used against PA science, and what it is when a word has more than one meaning, you can switch the meaning or use the one you want and claim the other one is wrong. So a great example of that, and the reason it was on a slide today, is the syndrome issue. I showed you what mainstream medical literature says defines a syndrome. I showed you the best reference I know in general medicine and the best reference I know in psychiatry. But someone else could say, well, I think a syndrome has to be a disease. And that would be a different definition. It's not necessarily wrong. So when you change words to suit your own argument or ignore a word's possible two meanings, alienation is another word like that. It could just mean estrangement. Or if we define it to mean the opposite of estrangement.
So is an equivocation fallacy something that you could tune into Fox News and see regularly?
I don't think anyone on Fox News would use that term, but I don't know. I don't watch it enough to know. I would say that if you know it exists, I'll give you a really great example. Everyone on this panel has seen this. The therapist is testifying and they say, well, doctor, wouldn't it be important to know whether it's alienation or estrangement? No, I don't need to know that. I know how to treat a relationship problem. But shouldn't you have did you evaluate the child? No, I did not. Why not? I was not appointed to evaluate the child. I was appointed to provide therapy. Okay, time out. Number one, there is no situation in all of medicine, not even disaster relief, in which you can you can treat anyone with no evaluation. And I'm a former EMS medical director. Even in a mass casualty incident, I got to know if he's got a pulse or not. That's an evaluation, right? So that's an equivocation fallacy, because what the psychologist, the hypothetical guy on the stand, just did is he used the word evaluation his way. He meant it to be, with a capital E, a court-appointed custody evaluation. But the question was, didn't you bother to find out what's going on with this kid before you treated him? Equivocation fallacy.
Good. Dr. Burnett, what is the frequency of occurrence of favored parent genuinely being unaware or unintentionally employing alienating conduct? And how do you distinguish between feigned and actual ignorance by the favored parent?
Okay, well, that's interesting. So the question is, we have a favored parent who appears to be engaging in alienating behaviors. Are there some situations in which it's being done accidentally? And I think that that does happen sometimes. In the classic discussions by Doug Darnell and even by Richard Gardner, they talk about in mild cases of alienation and in mild levels of alienating behavior, sometimes people can do it accidentally. They might do it unconsciously. They're not really intentionally ruining the child's relationship with the other parent. And you can talk to them. They're treatable. You can have a conference. You can talk to them and say, hey, do you know what you're doing, or have you noticed this? And they say, gee, I'm sorry. I didn't really mean to imply that Dad is a clod or a jerk. I guess I accidentally let that slip out or something. And yes, to answer your question, yes, I think that does happen in mild cases. But when you get to moderate and more severe cases, it is not accidental. It is on purpose.
Mr. Joshi, one of the things I love about you that I could never do, that I'm trying to learn from you, is that you make friends with everybody in these ridiculous cases. You win these cases and you fight like crazy, and you come back and you're friends with these people. But not many of us can do that. So here's a question for you. One basic obstacle is that lawyers and attorneys had to give their client the advice to help and support them, and therefore the alienation. This is a big problem. How do we change it?
It is a great question. There's a difference in being aggressive in court and helping your client navigate these litigation battles. I would recommend you to attend a session tomorrow in the legal track where Randy Flood and Brian Hart are going to talk about being parental coaches. And it's important for an attorney to find a professional who can help a client navigate these court battles, what's going on in their personal lives, because you can't be a handholder for everything. And you can't just take the calls at all times. Lawyers get burned out, expenses go through the roof. But it's important. It's a skill, and it's a tool that every attorney who takes on these cases should learn about.
For the 20-question survey, how do you account for children lying, throwing answers to protect the alienating parent?
So the Baker Strategy Questionnaire, again, sorry about my name in there, is the 20-item measure that we're talking about. And right now it is primarily used with adults reflecting on their childhood. And I have used it with teenagers. I haven't used it with alienated kids, who I suspect would not be necessarily honest. I think, well, there are other measures that have been used to differentiate alienated kids. I know that Bill Burnett has written a paper about that, and we'll be presenting some of that data tomorrow, correct? So there are ways to differentiate alienated kids from estranged kids. I don't think the Baker Strategy Questionnaire would be the best way to do it.
But this is a good question, and it deals with the kinds of reliability and validity we would get off of measures if they're just lying when they're filling out these questionnaires. Wouldn't you agree?
I would agree that there's noise in every measure has some noise. Even an IQ, noise is the sort of technical term for like error. And even an IQ test, somebody might circle the wrong thing, or they might have misread the item. There's ways to determine how much error there is in a measure. And so let's say we decided to give the Baker Strategy Questionnaire to a group of, 10-year-olds, we would be able to tell if the measure was working appropriately. And I suspect it might not. And then we would say, gee, that's not a good measure. And that'd be a great study to do to see if we can do that.
Okay. Ms. Gottlieb, you said to never let a therapist get away with allowing the children to not come to therapy sessions. What should be done if this situation occurs?
Okay, well, first of all, I don't think I ever use the word never or always.
That's what's written right here. I'm telling you, it's written right there.
All right. I mean, look, if the kid has 110 fever and whatever, so I just want to clarify. I like to stay away from always, never extremes. I think the children should not be put in charge of medical care anymore, and therapy is medical care. It overempowers an overempowered child already. If you want to put them in charge of the local pharmacy, how about that? Or how about setting the school curriculum? I mean, it boggles my mind. I don't know any other system in which children, or any other settings in which children occur, will we give so much voice to the child. And yet, while doing that, you ask these therapists, are you an expert on the suggestibility of children? Have you ever heard of Amy Baker in even one of her studies? How have you ruled out for the child being coached? And they don't know how to do it, but they empower the child. And there's so many reasons wrong with that. Salman Minuchin would refer to children like the alienated children that are empowered as a little tyrant. And he would ask the parents, how do you help your child grow down? One other thing I have to add, which I didn't get to add this morning. A lot of people will say, well, family therapy believes that both parents contribute. Sal Minuchin would never have confronted the rejected parent, control your child. Sal Minuchin would say to the triangulating parent, Why do you let your child abuse and mistreat your partner that way? You are permitting this. The child is standing on your shoulders, is more powerful now than both of you. Get that under control. So anyone who says that family therapy, when used appropriately, does not know how to treat alienation, never studied with Sal Minuchin, and probably never even read his basic book, Techniques of Family Therapy.
Thank you. Dr. Miller, who is behind the intentional creation of confusion concerning parental alienation, and why?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think. I think I have more of a thought-provoking answer than a definitive one. I think that what's going on now, the hardest thing to understand is why people are doing this. Why are they so vigorous in their opposition to what really is mostly settled science? The basics are well settled. What it is, how you can diagnose it, even how you can treat it is not totally clear, but certainly Linda has a very, very good success rate, and most other people have a terrible success rate. So why? Why are they so against it? I think there are a lot of reasons for that, but one of them is that there are different factions, okay? So there's a faction of people who come from the domestic violence proponent, people who not proponent of the violence, mind you, but protection. And I will stick my neck out and say many of them are simplistic thinkers. What they should be doing is learning how to tell the difference between a true and a false allegation, or between an alienated and an estranged child. And instead, since they really don't have the skills to do that, they just want to never agree that any child could be alienated. I've personally heard people say, as recently as a few months ago, any allegation of abuse or violence should be taken not just seriously, but taken to be true. And even if CPS comes in and calls it unfounded, they still feel that there's a small chance that it could still be real, so that's what we should do. So I used to do a lot of work with unions and labor disputes. If you have asthma, can you still work as a firefighter, that sort of thing. And some of the unions didn't care about the truth. They defended their member, right or wrong. And I think the analogy here is some of those folks simply will never agree to alienation because there'll be a tiny number of their own people who might lose a case because of that. They'd rather lose 99 cases that shouldn't have been lost to protect that one. I may be exaggerating a bit, but anyway, that's the phenomenon.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in on that, and moderator's prerogative. Working with Dr. Burnett since spring of 2017, I wish I had a nickel for every time Dr. Burnett said, no, we must make sure that every single contributor deals with the misinformation in their subject. In their chapter, they've got to deal with misinformation. I want misinformation addressed. No, Demosthenes, it's not enough addressing of misinformation in this chapter. They've just got to do it again. And damn it, many of those chapters were mine, and I had to go write them again and again and again. So there's a lot of information about misinformation in the upcoming book.
Demos, before you get to the next question, could I slip in another quick point?
Please.
Okay. I think it's helpful to understand that they are using rhetorical devices, the PA critics, and they are well-known rhetorical devices. And if you want to study them, all you need to do is read certain types of materials. For example, people who are advocates of intelligent design or anti-evolution. They use the equivocation fallacy. They use a bunch of other fallacies I won't mention. Kelly and Johnston, on the very first page of the reformulation paper, make the ludicrous claim that parental alienation is unscientific. I'm not giving the words exactly, but it's unscientific because it's not falsifiable and therefore tautological. Instantly, someone who's familiar with the intelligent design literature would understand that phrase comes from them.
Okay, and on that point,
And the anti-vaxxers, I have to add that group too.
and on that point, there's wonderful scholarship in the history of science describing how the people that were crapping up the science about cigarettes were the same people who are crapping up the science about flame retardants, who are the same people that are crapping up the science about climate change, are the same people who are crapping up the science about vaccinations. The same themes reoccur over and over and over again. So, Dr. Burnett, here's a question. When we discuss the voice of the child and hearing the voice of the child, what would it take to introduce the voice of the alienating parent?
I think I understand the question. The voice of the child, of course, refers to the idea that you should listen to children and do what they want. And I think we should listen to children, but we should not always do what they want. Because sometimes they're misguided or they don't realize they need to go to the dentist or whatever. The idea of the voice of the alienating parent is an interesting concept. And in fact, I know that in doing evaluations, what I would do is to try to elicit the voice of the alienating parent. I would try to get her or him to explain to me their style, their decisions, what they say to their children. And a really, almost all of them, especially the more hardcore ones, if you kind of are friendly and you open the door, they are perfectly happy to tell you the reasons that they have done the bad thing, the things that they've done. A guy used to say to his children that their mother cheated when she was in college, and she graduated with honors only because she borrowed somebody else's term paper. Now we're talking about something that happened 20 years ago. And so he would use that history. I don't even know if it was true. It doesn't matter. And you know, well, so I said, well, why? You know, what's going on? And you know, and he says, well, don't you, Dr. Burnett, don't you think that's something they need to know? Don't they need to know that their mother may have cheated 20 years ago when she was in college? In other words, the voice of the alienating parent is, if you give them a chance, they come right out and tell you. And I'll just give you one more example. The dad had a new girlfriend, and he was parked over at the girlfriend's condominium, and the dog was in the back of the car. And it was a hot day, and the dog died in the back of the dad's car parked at the girlfriend's condominium. So the children are asking him about the death of their pet. And the dad tells them, you know, he's not sure, but maybe mom had something to do with it. And this was part of my conversation with him. I said, well, tell me about that. You know, what were you thinking? He said, well, you know, I'm not really positive, but, you know, there's at least, I know that mom doesn't like animals very much. And I think it's possible that she may have gone over to what's-her-name's apartment and done something, and that's why the dog died. My point is that these are crazy things, but my point is that the voice of the alienating parent, frequently you can elicit either in evaluation or frequently in court. Some attorneys are very good at getting the alienating parent to describe why they never did anything to help the relationship with the other parent.
Okay, lightning round. I'm getting the hook here from the person that's running today. So we're in a lightning round. One more question, really quick answers from each person. Then I'm going to hand each person their set of questions, and I encourage you to find them and ask them follow-up questions. Mr. Joshi, does the availability of jury trials and civil suits facilitate movement and positive results in alienation cases? Say yes so you don't embarrass me and my presentation.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Dr. Baker.
No.
I'll want to add one thing. At times, it opens up a door to discovery. Take depositions of therapists, get phones and computers examined, which sometimes family judges are not too eager to do so. So there is also a strategic advantage in doing that.
Dr. Baker, how does a targeted parent avoid the possibility of having false memories themselves, which, if refuted, could impact their credibility?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
I don't either. So you talked about false memories and how false memories can occur. We know how easy it is to indoctrinate even adults into a false memory. Pesdick, Rowe, Loftus, on
Okay, so yes, now I understand the question. Thank you. And I would broaden it to say, obviously, being a targeted parent is a terrible, terrible, terrible experience. It's horribly demoralizing. Even if you don't have a false memory implanted, you're being devalued and delegitimized, and that is something that's actually happening, and that can corrupt the targeted parent's experience of themselves as a valuable person. So what you do about that is, oh man, I mean, I spent a lot of time coaching targeted parents to help them sort of remember their value. And I'll just say the one thing, if I could just share this one thing, is read the book that's for babies, but I highly recommend it, called The Runaway Bunny, because that is the best mommy I know. She never gets devalued. She never gets demoralized. She's always there to accept her child.
Thank you. Linda, what is the science that the target parents, is there any science that supports the idea that the target parent's bad behavior results from the other parent's bad behavior?
Well, if I understand the question, it reminds me of the 4 A's that develop in response to being maltreated. Alienated parents are normal human beings. They're normal parents. I mean, anybody who has to go bankrupt just to enforce your parental rights, fight off one false allegation of abuse after another, be cursed at, kicked, have hot coffee thrown on you by your beloved child, and very often you may have been the primary caretaker. People are going to react. But again, reacting is not the same as causing. You can't cause something that you're reacting to. That's the violation. What is it called? The laws of probability or laws of logic? Excuse me. I think that's what Dr. Miller would say. Obviously, that's not a good thing. And there are many of my colleagues on this panel and in the room who do very well in coaching alienated parents how to handle these very powerful emotions. And I think it's a great idea if you have taken on some of the 4 A's that you do seek out professional help, and also how to testify, because unfortunately the forensic evaluator isn't going to get it.
Dr. Miller, why aren't family court judges and also criminal court judges taught the biases, the cognitive fallacies that you talked about?
That's a hard question to answer for 2 reasons. One is I'm not sure, and 2 is it's very complicated. But the short answer is I think it's awareness. I think they don't know what they don't know, and I think the people who are teaching them don't know what they don't know. And I think we're in an early stage of evolution in terms of educating other professionals. That's my best I can do for a short answer.
Quick answer.
So I have a lengthy question here, but since you're a Tennessee psychiatrist and I'm a Tennessee lawyer, it's going to be the last question. In my jurisdiction, Nashville, yeehaw, I find that there is an exceptional lack of knowledge and training of therapists, creating a problem in finding a therapist who can complete family therapy to adequately address alienation issues. I find some judges do not want to intervene when mild facts exist, but the therapists available typically take what the child says as true. The host of problems addressed by Linda Gottlieb, etc., in her presentation. How can we address this?
Well, I agree that there are not enough therapists anywhere. Maybe every city has 2 or 3 or 4. We need training. I know some places are starting training for family counselors. I know we've tried to do training for psychiatrists and psychologists. There need to be training for child protection workers. I think that's what we need to do. There are different ways to do that. We try to infiltrate colleges or or you know, there are people who set curricula. If you're a psychologist, there are curricula that you're supposed to follow to get a certain pedigree, and so we need to infiltrate those boards. That's the short answer: is we need better training, and I hope we get it. But it's at the moment we're just in the stage of chipping away at this problem rather than really solving it.
Okay.
Can I add one thing?
Yes.
There's a fantastic decision that came out in 2018 from Tennessee Court of Appeals, McLean versus McLean. It's in my PowerPoint slides, where the Court of Appeals did a fantastic job of going through the trial court's opinion, dissecting parental alienation, but more specifically pointing out how the trial court should not have waited for a long time before taking action. And it's a great opinion that talks about lack of awareness, and when the interventions have to be made, there needs to be sufficient, sometimes drastic.
Cool. All right. So I am going to hand them the questions that you've written and addressed to them. And none of these people are getting paid. They're all here to help you deal with this pernicious phenomenon of child abuse. And I encourage you to come up to them and ask your questions that didn't get answered, and any follow-up questions